The rain pattered softly against the window, a rhythmic lullaby that accompanied the low hum of classical music drifting from the living room speakers. Daniel Lancaster sat in his favorite armchair, a book resting open in his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in the last 20 minutes. His eyes lingered on his wife, Claire, who stood by the fireplace, sipping a glass of red wine. She was beautiful, always had been. A cascade of dark hair fell over her shoulder as she leaned slightly against the mantel, staring into the flames. They had been married for 12 years. 12 years of shared laughter, quiet nights like this, vacations to the mountains, and lazy Sunday mornings in bed. Their life was not without its difficulties, of course. Every marriage had its share of rough waters. But Daniel had always believed that they were solid, unshakable. Claire was his anchor, his constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. But something had changed. It was subtle at first, like a hairline crack in a pane of glass. The way she looked at him, less lingering, more distracted. The moments when she'd smile but it wouldn't quite reach her eyes. The nights when she'd roll away from him in bed with an excuse about being too tired or lost in thought. And then there were the phone calls. A few weeks ago, he had walked into the kitchen late at night to get a glass of water and found her standing in the dim glow of the refrigerator light, whispering into her phone. When she saw him, she actually startled, and quickly ended the call. "Who was that?" he had asked, voice casual, but something heavy pressed against his chest. "No one," she had said too quickly. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, she added, "Just Amanda. She's going through some things." Daniel had nodded, pretending to believe her. He hadn't pushed. He wasn't the kind of man who suffocated his wife with suspicion. Trust was the foundation of their marriage. And yet, a soft vibration against the wooden coffee table made both of them glance in its direction. Claire's phone lit up, casting an eerie glow in the dim room. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before picking it up, turning the screen away from him as she read the message. Daniel saw it, though. Just a glimpse. Enough to see that it wasn't Amanda. And that the message had been signed with a single letter, J. A tight coil of something dark and unfamiliar wound itself around his ribs. His gaze flickered to Claire, who was already setting the phone down, her expression carefully neutral. She turned back toward the fire, taking another sip of wine. Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time in 12 years, he wasn't sure if he truly knew his wife at all. The night after seeing that text, Daniel barely slept. He lay in bed beside Claire, staring at the ceiling, listening to her steady breathing. Every now and then, she would shift, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, but she never turned toward him. That damn text. Just a single letter, J. It could mean nothing. It could be an old friend, a coworker. Maybe it was even Amanda's husband texting from her phone. Rational explanations existed. And yet, the pit in his stomach told him otherwise. Daniel had never been the jealous type. He prided himself on that. He had always trusted Claire implicitly. She had male friends, colleagues, hell, they had both been in serious relationships before meeting each other. It never bothered him. It never even crossed his mind to be suspicious. But something was wrong. He felt it in his bones. The first sign of betrayal. The next morning, Claire was already up when he came downstairs. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, but she wasn't there. Her cup sat on the counter, half empty, lipstick smudging the rim. He glanced at the clock, 7:12 a.m. Too early for her to have left for work. Then he heard her voice. Soft. Muffled. Coming from the backyard. Through the glass doors, he saw her standing on the patio, phone pressed to her ear. Her back was turned to him, but her posture was tense. Daniel stepped closer, careful to keep out of her line of sight. Her voice was low, urgent. Don't say that. A pause. No, I just don't know, okay? A heavy sigh. It's complicated. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Another silence. Then a soft, almost desperate whisper. I can't talk right now. I'll call you later. She ended the call, exhaling sharply, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. She ran a hand through her hair, standing there for a moment, staring at the sky. Then, as if sensing something, she turned slightly. Daniel stepped back quickly, making a show of walking into the kitchen. A second later, she came inside, her face a careful mask. "Hey," she said, forcing a smile. "Morning," Daniel replied, pretending not to notice the way her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed her coffee. She kissed his cheek, but it felt mechanical. Absent. Something inside him cracked. The search for the truth. Daniel waited for her to leave for work before he did something he had never done in 12 years of marriage. He checked her phone. He told himself it was just to ease his mind. That he was being paranoid. That he would find a mundane conversation with a friend or an innocent exchange with a coworker, and he would feel like an idiot for even doubting her. But Claire's phone was gone. She always left it charging on the kitchen counter while she got ready. But today? It was missing. She had taken it into the shower with her. Daniel swallowed hard. That wasn't normal. His heart pounded as a terrifying thought took root in his mind. She was hiding something. The evidence. For the next few days, Daniel watched her. He didn't want to. He hated himself for it. But once the seed of doubt had been planted, it spread like a wildfire. Claire started working late more often. Meetings, she said. Unexpected deadlines. But when he asked about them, her answers were vague. She guarded her phone like a lifeline. And then, on Friday night, she came home smelling like someone else. It was faint. Subtle. But it was there. A scent that wasn't hers. A man's cologne. She had showered before coming home. Daniel said nothing. Instead, he made a decision. He would find out the truth. The breaking point. The next day, while Claire was in the shower, Daniel took her laptop. She never logged out of her email. His hands were shaking as he opened it. The inbox was clean, almost too clean. But then he checked the trash folder. And there it was. An email from a James M. The subject line was empty. Daniel clicked it. I can't stop thinking about last night. I need to see you again. Soon. J. Daniel felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. His entire body went cold. This was it. The confirmation. The end of his illusions. His wife was having an affair. And he had no idea what to do next. The words on the screen blurred as Daniel stared at them, his heart pounding in his ears like a war drum. I can't stop thinking about last night. I need to see you again. Soon. J. There it was. Unmistakable. Undeniable. Claire was cheating on him. Daniel sat back in the chair, his breath shaky. His fingers curled into fists so tight his nails bit into his palms. The email was still fresh, sent 2 nights ago. He closed the laptop lid slowly, as if expecting it to explode in his hands. His mind screamed for action. Confront her. Call her out. Demand answers. But another part of him, colder, calculating, held him back. He needed more. A descent into paranoia. For the rest of the day, Daniel felt like a ghost in his own home. Claire acted normal. She hummed while making coffee. She kissed his cheek before heading out. She texted him from work about dinner plans. But every touch, every smile, felt like a lie. He responded as usual, playing his part, but inside he was unraveling. When she went to bed that night, Daniel stayed up. He needed proof, undeniable proof, before he confronted her. He couldn't risk her lying her way out of this. So he began digging. He checked their phone bill online. Her call log showed frequent, lengthy conversations with an unknown number. The same number. Over and over again. He wrote it down. Then he checked their shared credit card statement. Most of Claire's purchases were routine groceries, gas, the occasional restaurant bill. But then he saw it. A hotel charge. The Haven Suites. 3 nights ago. Daniel stared at the screen, his entire body cold with rage. He had always imagined that if this day ever came, if Claire ever betrayed him, he would know. That he would feel it in his gut. That the world would tilt and shift, announcing the moment his marriage died. But reality was crueler. There had been no dramatic realization. No gut feeling. Just a slow unraveling of truth, one thread at a time, until the entire fabric of their life came apart in his hands. The confrontation. The next evening, Daniel sat at the dining table, waiting. Claire walked in, carrying takeout bags. "I got your favorite," she said, placing them on the table. Daniel didn't respond. She frowned. "Everything okay?" "Sit down," he said, his voice like ice. Claire hesitated. Something in his tone made her wary. But after a moment, she slid into the chair across from him. Daniel pulled out his phone and placed it between them. He opened the call log. "This number." He turned the screen toward her. "Who is it?" Claire blinked. "What?" "You've called this number over 30 times in the last 2 weeks. Who is it?" A flicker of something fear, maybe, crossed her face before she recovered. "Daniel, are you checking my calls?" She laughed, but it was forced. "Jesus, what's gotten into you?" He didn't blink. Didn't move. "Answer the question." She sighed, shaking her head. "It's Amanda." She changed her number. Daniel slid a printed copy of the hotel receipt across the table. Claire's face drained of color. The air between them turned electric. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "Try again." She swallowed hard, eyes darting away. "It's not what you think." "What I think?" Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "I found the emails, Claire." Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. Daniel's voice was razor-sharp. "James M." He signed off as J. Silence. A horrible, suffocating silence. Claire's hands trembled slightly. She opened her mouth. Closed it. And then, "I'm sorry." It was barely a whisper. Daniel felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. She wasn't even denying it. A strange, bitter calm settled over him. "How long?" Claire wiped at her eyes. "Does it matter?" His jaw clenched. "Yes. It matters." She hesitated. And then, softly, 3 months. Daniel exhaled, his fingers digging into the table. 3 months. A quarter of a year. 100 days of deceit. The Claire he knew, the Claire he loved, was gone. Who is he? His voice was barely above a whisper. Claire looked down, ashamed. He's no one. Someone I met at work. It just happened." Daniel's laughter was hollow. "It just happened? That's your excuse?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" His voice cracked with pain. "Why, Claire?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I was lonely. We've been distant. I felt unseen." Daniel's stomach twisted. He wanted to scream. To shake her. To demand how he had been the one to make her feel invisible while she was the one lying. Instead, he just whispered. "Did you love him?" Claire's breath hitched. Daniel felt something inside him shatter. "You did." She buried her face in her hands. "I don't know. I don't know how I feel anymore." A long silence stretched between them. Then Daniel spoke, his voice hollow. "I want a divorce." Claire's head snapped up. "No, Daniel, wait. Please. He stood, pushing his chair back. There's nothing left to talk about. She grabbed his wrist. Please. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But I don't want to lose you. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. The woman he had spent 12 years of his life with. The woman he had dreamed of growing old with. And all he saw was a stranger. You already did. He pulled away. Claire sobbed. Please, Daniel. Please don't walk away. Daniel turned toward the stairs, his voice empty. I already have. He didn't look back. The cold silence of betrayal. Daniel walked out of the dining room and into the suffocating quiet of the house. Claire's sobs echoed behind him, but he didn't turn back. He climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. His hands trembled as he reached for the bedroom door. It was their room, the place where they had once whispered secrets in the dark, where he had traced every line of her body like a cartographer memorizing his most precious land. Now, it felt like a crime scene. The sheets on the bed were the same ones they had slept in for years, but they felt foreign. Had she lain in them thinking of another man? Had she showered in their bathroom, washing away the scent of someone else before slipping into bed beside him? The thought made him sick. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his breathing ragged. The confrontation had ended, but the war inside him raged on. Claire had begged for forgiveness. But could a person truly forgive this? Could he? Doubt, pain, and a plan. For hours, Daniel sat in the dimly lit bedroom, staring at the floor. His phone buzzed, messages from Claire. Claire, please talk to me. Claire, I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us. Claire, Daniel, I love you. I never stopped loving you. Daniel stared at the last message, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Love. What a hollow, meaningless word. If she had loved him, she wouldn't have done this. His hands clenched around the phone. A part of him wanted to reply, to scream, to curse, to demand answers that would never satisfy him. But another part of him, a darker part, whispered a different idea. Revenge. Why should she get to cry? Why should she get to beg? She had taken everything from him, their trust, their love, their life. And now she wanted mercy? No. She didn't deserve mercy. She deserved to know what betrayal felt like. The execution of a broken man. Daniel spent the next few days acting like a man on autopilot. He didn't respond to Claire's texts or calls. He barely spoke when she was home. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The idea of revenge consumed him. And so, he set the pieces in motion. Step 1, gather more evidence. Daniel went through Claire's emails again, taking screenshots of every damning message. He searched their home Wi-Fi history and found more deleted messages, social media exchanges, even hotel booking confirmations. Step 2, find James. It took some digging, but eventually, Daniel found him. James Mercer. Mid-40s. Married. 2 kids. A corporate manager at a financial firm downtown. The knowledge made Daniel's blood boil. This man hadn't just destroyed his marriage. He had his own family, a wife, children. Did his wife know? Did his kids? Step 3, make him pay. A visit to the office. Daniel dressed sharply that morning, a tailored suit, polished shoes. He wanted to look calm, in control. Because that was exactly what he was. He arrived at James Mercer's office downtown just before lunch. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? Daniel smiled back. No, but I think he'll want to see me. He placed an envelope on the counter, a thick one. Tell him it's urgent. Family matter. The receptionist hesitated but eventually nodded, making the call. A minute later, James Mercer stepped into the lobby. He was exactly what Daniel expected, tall, broad-shouldered, a man who had probably never felt a consequence in his life. He looked confused, then wary. Can I help you? Daniel smiled. Oh, I think you can. He handed James the envelope. James frowned and opened it. Inside were printed copies of his emails with Claire, hotel receipts, screenshots of texts. James paled. I assume your wife doesn't know, Daniel said coolly. Yet. James looked around, lowering his voice. Look, I don't know what you think this is. Oh, I know exactly what it is. Daniel stepped closer. You had an affair with my wife. And now, I'm here to make sure you pay for it. James swallowed. What do you want? Daniel smirked. I already sent a copy of that envelope to your wife. James stiffened. His eyes widened with real fear. You're lying. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed him the sent email. Subject, your husband's affair. Attached, everything. James looked like he had been punched in the gut. His breath came in shallow gasps. Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. You don't get to walk away from this clean. James took a step back, his hands trembling. Please. My kids. Daniel's smirk vanished. Did you think about my marriage? About me? About the years you helped her throw away? James said nothing. Daniel gave him one last, cold look before turning away. As he stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, he felt something he hadn't felt in days. Relief. The last conversation. That night, Claire was waiting for him when he got home. She stood in the living room, eyes red, clutching a crumpled tissue. James' wife called me. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh? She knows everything, Claire whispered. James got fired today. His wife is leaving him. Daniel remained silent. Claire took a shaky breath. Did you do this? He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Does it matter? Tears slipped down her face. I don't even recognize you. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's funny. Because I don't recognize you. She reached for him, desperate. We can fix this. Daniel pulled away. No, Claire. You broke this. And now, you get to live with it. Her sobs followed him as he walked away. But this time, he felt nothing. Nothing at all. The weight of finality. The house felt like a tomb. It had been a home once, a place filled with laughter and warmth, where Daniel had felt safe. Now, it was just a collection of walls and memories he wanted to erase. Claire stood before him, her face pale, her eyes pleading. The wreckage of what she had done was finally sinking in. You're really leaving, she whispered. Daniel nodded. Yes. She took a shaky step forward. Daniel, please. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can. His jaw clenched. Do you think a few counseling sessions are going to erase what you did? Claire flinched. I didn't mean to fall for him, she choked out. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Right. It just happened. The hotel room just happened. The lies just happened. That's how it works, isn't it? Claire wrapped her arms around herself. I was lonely. We were both lonely. But I didn't cheat. She swallowed hard. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Over and over again. For 3 months, Claire. Do you even know how many times that is? Daniel shook his head. How many mornings did you wake up next to me, knowing you were lying? How many times did you look me in the eye and tell me you loved me, knowing you were sneaking off to be with him? Claire broke into quiet sobs. I love you. I never stopped. You don't do this to people you love. She took another step forward. If you didn't love me anymore, you wouldn't be this angry. You wouldn't have done what you did to James. Daniel stared at her, his lips curling in disgust. You think I did that because I love you? I did it because he needed to pay. And so do you. Claire shook her head desperately. This isn't you. Daniel exhaled, his voice empty. It is now. The goodbye that wasn't. The next morning, Daniel packed his bags. Claire stood in the doorway, her face hollow with grief. I never thought we'd end like this, she said softly. Daniel zipped his suitcase. Neither did I. She reached out, fingers brushing against his wrist. I know you hate me now, but you were the best thing that ever happened to me. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, I was. And then he walked out the door. Claire didn't follow. She just stood there, silent, as the man she had betrayed disappeared from her life. The road to nowhere. Daniel didn't look back. As he drove away, the house shrank in the rearview mirror, fading into the past like a life that belonged to someone else. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. His chest was heavy, like there was a weight pressing down on his ribs, making it hard to breathe. For 12 years, Claire had been his person. The one who knew him better than anyone else. The one who had promised forever. But forever was a lie. The betrayal still burned inside him, a wildfire that refused to die. It wasn't just the act itself, it was everything. The deception, the gaslighting, the fact that she had looked him in the eyes for months and pretended nothing was wrong. He had wanted revenge. And he got it. James had lost everything. His job, his marriage, his carefully crafted life. The last Daniel had heard, his wife had thrown him out of their house and taken their kids with her. It should have felt good. But there was no victory in the ashes. Only emptiness. A place to hide. Daniel checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town. He had no real plan, just an overwhelming need to get away. The room was depressing. Stiff sheets, dim lighting, a TV that buzzed with static. But it was quiet. He sat on the bed and pulled out his phone. Dozens of unread messages. Claire, I miss you. Claire, can we just talk? Please. Claire, I don't know how to do this without you. He deleted them without responding. Then there was a message from Mark, his oldest friend. Mark, hey, man. I heard. I'm here if you need anything. Daniel hesitated. He hadn't told anyone the full story, but Mark had always been sharp. He must have sensed something was wrong. After a long moment, Daniel finally replied. Daniel, I could use a drink. Mark responded immediately. Mark, name the place. Whiskey and Wounds. An hour later, Daniel was sitting in a dimly lit bar across from Mark, nursing his second glass of whiskey. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying him. You look like hell. Daniel let out a dry laugh. I feel worse. Mark sipped his beer. So, you want to tell me what happened? For a moment, Daniel considered lying. Saying it was just a rough patch, just a separation. But what was the point? So he told him. Everything. Mark listened in silence. No interruptions, no useless platitudes. Just the occasional slow sip of his beer as Daniel laid it all out. When he was done, Mark exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ. Yeah. Mark shook his head. I always liked Claire, but, damn. 3 months? 3 months, Daniel confirmed. While I was sleeping next to her every night. Mark's jaw tightened. I'd say I'm surprised, but I'm not. People are selfish as hell. Daniel stared into his glass. What do I do now? Mark frowned. You get through it. One way or another. Daniel scoffed. That's vague as hell. Mark smirked. Yeah, well, I don't have a step-by-step guide for getting over the absolute worst betrayal imaginable. Daniel let out a breath. Yeah. Fair. Mark studied him for a long moment, then said, Have you considered seeing someone? Daniel shot him a look. A therapist? Mark shrugged. Yeah.
Someone who can help you process this. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't know. Think about it, man. It's either that or drinking yourself into oblivion. Daniel smirked. I mean, that's still an option. Mark laughed. You always were a dumbass.
For the first time in days, Daniel smiled.
It was small. Fleeting. But it was something. The ghost of Claire. 3 weeks passed. Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a simple one-bedroom, but it was his. His own space. No ghosts of the past lurking in the corners. But Claire's presence still haunted him. Every time he heard a song they used to love. Every time he passed the restaurant where they had their first date. Every time he reached for his phone out of habit, forgetting that there was no one left to text. She had tried to call. He never picked up. One night, there was a knock at his door. He knew who it was before he even opened it. Claire stood there, eyes red-rimmed, clutching a bag in her hands. I brought your things, she said softly. Daniel nodded and stepped aside. She walked in, her movements hesitant, as if she were stepping into the home of a stranger. Which, in a way, she was. She placed the bag down and turned to face him. How are you? Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Fine. She swallowed. You look different. Yeah, he said. I guess betrayal does that to a person. Claire flinched. Daniel. He exhaled sharply. Why are you really here? She hesitated. I needed to see you. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. And now that you have? Tears filled her eyes. Do you think there's ever a chance? No. The word was cold. Final. Claire bit her lip, nodding slowly. I'm so sorry. Daniel didn't respond. She wiped at her tears and turned toward the door. Goodbye, Daniel. He watched her go. And this time, he didn't feel anything. The first real breath. A month passed. Then another. The pain didn't disappear, but it dulled. Daniel went to therapy, like Mark had suggested. He focused on himself, his work, his health, his future. One evening, he sat on his balcony, watching the city lights. For the first time in a long time, the weight on his chest felt lighter. He wasn't the same man he had been before. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Something better. Daniel took a deep breath. And for the first time in months, it felt like his own.